Coming up on Uncommon Sense today, join us as we interview Dr. Mark Nowakowski, a composer and associate professor of music at Kent State University and a lover of Chesterton. Join us to learn more. Hello and welcome to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. As usual, I'm your host, Grettelyn and I'm joined today by my wonderful co-host, Joe Grabowski. Joe, how are you today?
Pretty well, thank you.
Good. And we are so blessed to be joined by Dr. Mark Nowakowski. Hello.
Hello.
So good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. One of our friends, Nancy Brown, who we've had on here before, she's an author. She stumbled upon your setting of Chesterton's poem, and we were so excited and listened to it, and it's absolutely beautiful. We'll try to get it in here later in the episode. But first of all, if you wouldn't mind, Mark, just telling us a little more about you, yourself, your career path, where you are in your life right now.
Well, I don't know how far back we're going to go. I was born in Chicago. My parents were both Polish immigrants, so sort of grew up with my feet in two different worlds. One was sort of the Polish diaspora, the Catholic Church at that time in the 80s, and the other, foot in Americana, right? And so I kind of feel like I got the best and worst of both sides in certain cases. At some point, started studying music. I think I sort of fell into music studies and composition, sort of fell in backwards. So there was a definite, or perhaps pushed in, if we're thinking that way. And did my years of study. Composition at some point became something I felt as a deep professional calling. And I tried to. It's a very unreasonable way to go in life. And so I tried to give God plenty of opportunities to give me other things to do. And every time I was about to take the exit, take the off ramp, he would push me right back on and go, no, look, this is where you're going. And that's, and then there's a lot of stories that go behind that, but that's the way it was. And completed my doctorate at the University of Maryland, began to try to build sort of two related streams of things. And one was the academic career, which a lot of composers go towards, both because it provides stability if you're going to have a family, but also provides access to the wider music community and the opportunities that brings. And the other side, freelancing as a composer and doing it in all the different, trying to put together all the different ways of doing it that I was told I shouldn't by my professors over the years. And somehow that's managed to work out. Today I teach at Kent State. I teach music technology production, some composition there, and work with various groups. I'm the board of directors of the Catholic Art Institute in Chicago. We work with a lot of great Catholic artists across disciplines across the world. Next weekend, I'll be going to San Francisco to do some Chesterton Carol stuff with the Benedict XVI Institute and Archbishop Cordileone. So it's been a pleasure to sort of, as my career's been coming together, there's been this coalescing at the same time of a deep world, I think, of all the sort of scattered Catholic artists have begun to use the internet and related means of communication to come together and create a community. And it's been an enlivening part to be part of that as well. And that's played a bigger and bigger part, I think, in my career as well as it's gone on.
Wonderful. Well, how do you, just a little dive in there, what kind of collaborations have you been able to do so far? Or is it a sort of like all upcoming?
There's a number of things come around. Currently, I have, again, a foot in two separate worlds, and I was told don't do both because it's complicated, but I'm trying anyways. I'm working on a big setting of the 7 Last Words of Christ, which a lot of composers have set, and this would be for a string orchestra, bass, baritone, vocalist, and a couple additional instruments, and that's for a group I just worked with for the first time a year ago in Poland, actually. There's a chamber orchestra in my mother's hometown, and we sort of we almost accidentally found ourselves premiering a piece in the same large church where my mother was baptized and took her first Holy Communion, which was very,
Wow.
very surreal. And it went well, apparently, because they reached out to me to do a really big project, and we hope it becomes the basis of a third CD. So I'm doing that, and then with my other foot, I'm trying to finish up the scoring for the Mass of the Ages trilogy. So we're working on part 3 of that right now, and we're literally in like the last 5% of cleaning things up and doing a couple extended scenes and mixes. And there's a couple other projects going around as well. I released a CD this past May, which was a collection of acoustic and electroacoustic works, some instrumental pieces, some pieces which involved singers, a choir piece, and then some pieces that used electronically modified elements. And that was kind of neat because it was released through a small label in Poland. And it managed to hit #1 on the Amazon classical sellers twice.
Nice.
And it was very surreal to see your sort of off in the wilderness work begin to leapfrog some of the people you grew up idolizing. So that was a big blessing to see that happen. And yeah, there's always, we always have a list of things that we're going to do next. You try to keep the ball rolling. Maybe it's more like, pushing the boulder uphill. But,
No, it's wonderful though, and it's great to hear that God's hand has sort of been there with you the whole time. That's beautiful. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I followed with great interest the work of the Benedict XVI Institute. I used to work with Maggie Gallagher. She and I go back quite a ways. That I worked for the National Organization for Marriage, which she was a co-founder of.
Yes.
And Archbishop Cordileone, very much a supporter of kind of the pro-family, pro-life, building up that culture, though, which it very often gets thought of as sort of a political thing, but really the renewal of culture is so deeply about what John Paul II was calling for in this building up of a culture of life and so forth. And so maybe just speak to, if you would, the importance of faith patronizing the arts and how that renewal of culture. This is something Bishop Barron talks about so frequently, how beauty is sort of a tool of evangelization. But yeah, maybe your insights. This is something I think many of our listeners would be interested in how the restoration of culture is integral to not just the life of faith, but the future of our civilization, so to speak.
There's a joke, right, that science can tell us how to clone a dinosaur, and the arts perhaps have told us why this might be a bad idea. Right? There's when you look at, I think, a lot of the major Catholic writers of the 20th century and artistic figures, seems to be this understanding of myth and aesthetic, providing a clarifying lens. For me, I've always experienced the arts and music as a focusing. I'm very interested in the notion of what it means to pay attention in life and in faith, in big things and in little things. And lately, this is something that's been haunting me. I mean, any given moment, we have a billion details hitting us. And what causes us to focus on certain things is dependent, perhaps in part, by the way we're designed biologically, but also with our values, right? Our value becomes the lens which enables us to focus, hopefully, on the right things at the right moments. And I think what the cleaner for that lens, or the sharpener of that lens, the arts can provide that. Right? Poetry, I think, is the most basic example. Why not just write everything in the style of an instruction manual? Or why even use words? We could do the pictures like on IKEA manuals. No, there's something about changing the context and the grammatical construct that happens in well-written poetry that causes us to focus on things that we may have thought were less important, and it turns out are vitally important. And I think music does that as well in an abstract sort of way. Obviously, that's what painters do. They say, look at this. Sculptors say, look at this way. And there's a type of manipulation that's possible with that. And so the artist, I think, has to be well-formed. The church seems to have understood this from the very beginning. I was so struck when I visited Rome. I visited Rome a year before John Paul II died, and ended up had a stroke of luck. I ended up being late for my appointment for a tour of St. Cecilia's catacombs. But there was another guy that just had no one to take on a tour, so he took me on a private tour. And so here I am,
Nice.
we're wandering through these catacombs, and I was struck by, these harried early believers were already creating sacred art in the most, frankly, unwelcoming of places, right? There was paintings on the walls, and as soon as the legalization of Christianity occurred, with it occurred the great architectural monuments, and we began to develop and codify our sense of music over the 1,000 years, which set the foundation of music, for the rest of history up until today, right? And the church somehow always understood that this was just a part of what it did. Right now, I'm trying to write a book on the nature of beauty and how to discern beauty in the modernist and postmodernist age. Right, as a Catholic, how can an artist or an arts supporter discern what is worth pursuing? And it struck me that if you look at about the first 1,000 years of Christian writing, and there isn't a great deal written about aesthetics, about the perception of beauty, about the arts. And part of this is the medieval perspective of, how things I think were more unified. Part of it is there isn't such a thing like a monolithic medieval perspective on aesthetics. But part of it is, and I think the greatest part of it is, and this is just my theory, but I think they were just doing it so much. It was just what was, there was the church, and the church is built, and it was painted, and there were beautiful statues, and they were composing music, and this was just a natural thing to do, and nobody was questioning it. And the question now of how should the church support the arts? What is beauty? How do we pursue beauty? How do we how do we patronize beauty? How do we create beauty? We're having to revisit all of this because the church has sadly abandoned her role as the main patron of the arts, which is her natural role and her good and fitting role. And one of the things she does best, we recall Pope Benedict saying, that next to the witness of the saints, it's the beauty of the church's arts, which, I'm paraphrasing badly, but I'm sure you probably have read this quote. It's the beauty of the arts which provides such a powerful witness to her mission. And growing up and sort of coming back to my faith at the end of college, I was in the midst of very modernistic departments. Right, beauty was a byword, if not something that was ridiculed. It was considered purely subjective, and I had this. Part of my conversion was the adopting of a very unshakable sense that beauty was objective. It wasn't a subjective reality; it was an objective reality to be pursued. That as an artist, I was searching for something that was real. Right, if it was just based on my opinion or my subconscious, it'd be a lot easier to go about. But I was certainly reaching for something that was beyond myself. And as time has gone on, I think that I've come to understand beauty as capital B or small b beauty. That we talk about capital T and small t tradition. So I'd say, and this goes all the way back to, I'm blanking on his 3rd century Christian writer, it'll come back to me. But he would write about a capital B beauty, referring to beauty as the self-revelation of God. It's God is love, God is beauty. And that is ultimately what we're reaching towards, that objective reality. And whatever part of that, I think artists are allowed to see certain parts of that, perhaps. It's our gift. This is what you're allowed to see. This is what you're allowed to reach for. If you don't reach for it, nobody else will. And that becomes part of our calling. And again, the church always understood this. And I think we've had a part of the catastrophic crisis that we found ourselves in has been the adopting of the world's view on aesthetics, which increasingly just gravitate towards entertainment, as opposed to an elevated pursuit. And if we focusing more specifically to something like the Benedict XVI Institute or the Catholic Art Institute, you take somebody like a single archbishop, like Archbishop Cordileone. He's just one man in the church, and he's been able to do so very much. The commissioning of paintings, new books of poetry, literary works, conferences. He's commissioned and paid for the several glorious masses that Frank LaRocca has written, which have hit the Billboard charts. Right, that we're literally, as Catholic composers, hitting the Billboard charts. And a little thing like they're flying me out there next week so that I can present a more approachable version of this carol that we're talking about today, the Chesterton Carol. They said, well, it's beautiful,
Great.
it's for choir and orchestra, but this is kind of hard for the average parish to pull out. So they said, can we commission you to make a parish version for simpler choir and organ? And and so we're premiering that this coming Saturday. And that's a little thing, but somebody has to do that, because what we encounter as artists in the modern era is we have to be not only great at what we do, we strive to be, we have to be entrepreneurs, we have to be, business people, we have to, put our name and our work out there, and it becomes like wearing 3 or 4 hats at once. And just one bishop has been able to do so much to help with that. And I always say that if we had 10 Cordileones running around in the West, we would have a Catholic Renaissance. Because my experience, especially since I started working more with the Catholic Art Institute and planning things with them, has been to discover at their conferences that we have an embarrassment of Catholic artistic talent, especially in North America. And I don't know what it is about North America being such a focus point on this, but it's almost like we hit rock bottom first and we're rebounding first. and there's a lot of great Catholic artists. And I think in every discipline, we could have a renaissance tomorrow. It could start tomorrow if the patronage was there, if the ecclesial support was there. These people are accomplishing incredible things, sometimes in spite of the lack of support that they receive. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that was great. I'm you wouldn't know it by my voice right now, but I am a singer. I have a trio that I sing with, and that's we just kind of go where we can. It's the sort of thing where you just like you said, there's all this talent, like we're just 3 girls, but we've been doing this together for a while, but finding a venue can be a bit tricky. One time we sang a concert with a free will offering and we made $16. We had practiced and worked with a harpsichordist and like all this stuff. And so yeah, it's tricky, but I totally agree. If we had just a couple more people to just start being like, this is what you do. You just patronize them just a little. You don't even need you don't have to go and you don't need to go and become a rock star. You just need to be able to make a living and be able to still do this and not give it up to go, sadly, put your art at the service of a Hershey's commercial or something like that.
Or, make it, it's the proverbial, well, you could always do it on the side when you're not doing your serious job. And I just had this discussion with somebody recently that was rebelling against the idea of paying choir singers to sing at Mass. I said, well, you should be donating your time and talent. I go, perhaps, but if somebody spends years developing that talent since childhood and they take college loans to receive their education, it's you're not going to school and you're not spending a lifetime studying. You have to pay your bills and feed your children as well. Yeah. And so you can't do part-time art. It doesn't work.
Right. And it is a gift, but it's not a magic gift that you don't have to work at.
Yes.
Anyway, sorry, this is a bit of a rant, so I promise I'll stop. But
maybe I absolutely agree.
I think it's important if you're going to talk about the renewal of the arts in the church. It's you kind of get what you pay for, and you can see what that has brought us. Sadly, for many years. Yes. But maybe we can turn the conversation a little more to the piece that we wanted to talk about today. I'm very excited to hear that you're adapting it for organ and for parish choir. It has a very lovely and enviable soprano solo that I really would like to sing someday.
You're welcome to it.
No, it's great. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna try to learn it. But Anyway, just tell us a little bit about, what stirred you in with this poem that you wanted to set it to such a beautiful setting of music.
Well, actually, in anticipation of this, I just wrote a little article about the history of the Chesterton Carol. It's on my Substack right now. So if readers want to search my name in Substack, they can find it. The post is called The Chesterton Carol. But what happened shortly after I was married in 2010, a singer who I was associated with at the time, there was a group called the Foundation for Sacred Arts that I was helping out. And it was one of the first coalescings, I think, of Catholic talent that happened in North America. And the group eventually went under, but the networks that it left behind, I think, have been invaluable to lead to other things. And one of those connections was with a contralto named Imelda Franklin Bogue, who's also a faithful Catholic. And for non-musician listeners, a contralto is a low female voice, lower than the alto, roughly in the tenor range. And so it tends to be, when it's sung well, it tends to be very rich and sonorous. It can be very, very beautiful. And Imelda was definitely one of those singers. So she said she wanted to commission me to write something. And I would have set any text she asked me to set just to hear her sing it. But she picks this Chesterton Carol. And I had not heard of it. And I had just started reading my first Chesterton book, which was Orthodoxy. And I was very much wrestling with Chesterton. He has since then been on my list of authors you keep to read whenever you think you're getting smart. You open some Chesterton and you realize how much farther you have to go in your intellectual journey, perhaps. But so I was familiar with that side of Chesterton, and I was fighting that battle daily with this book. And then she sends me this simple little poem. And I was shocked that G.K. Chesterton, the formidable intellect, the man who was causing me such intellectual weightlifting pains daily, wrote this beautiful little childlike poem. And of course, spending time with it. And I know, as I wrote in my Substack, I believe Joseph Pierce said that, and I love Joseph Pierce's works. I'll disagree with him here. He said that they were sort of subpar, I think, Christmas poems. And this one, I don't think so. I think it's deceptively simple. It's sort of Mozartian in its simplicity, because the rhyme scheme is nothing special. It's nothing that's, it's not Shakespeare, but it's something that, like maybe like a beautiful Christmas ornament that glitters as you turn it around, or a simple icon that reflects in candlelight differently than in, say, next to a regular lamp. It reveals other details, and it has a contemplative nature to it. So I was really happy spending time with this text. And so when you get a text like this as a composer, I mean, everyone's different. I like using the Lectio Divina approach on texts, at least if they have a sacred orientation. So you spend time with it and you see what it's really trying to say. Because I think if a work of art is effective, if it's necessary, then God is able to speak through it somehow. And you're able to encounter God in a unique way through this work. And I thought this was one of them. So it struck me that the text was it was both supernatural and naturalistic. And I come from the Polish carol tradition, and all those, they have these beautiful, beautiful Christmas carols. They're not really known in the West because people are terrified of singing Polish, and I don't blame them. But they're all about, the Christ child born into the mud and put into the stable, and there's donkeys and they smell, and they're very mournful carols. And a lot of the Slavic traditions really like that. The English have some of that too, right? The English do have a little bit of that morose nature to some of the carols. So I said, well, my soul music, in a sense, was the Slavic carol, but Chesterton was an Englishman. So how can I write a carol that sort of sounds like it might have come from one of these worlds? And so that's what I tried to do, essentially, to write a very simple melody that would allow the text to speak for itself. And the first version was just for Imelda and piano accompaniment. And I was pretty happy with it. It's my wife who loved it. My wife really liked it. She said, "This is the best thing you've done. You need to put it out there." And at the time, I really didn't know how to do that yet. And so, as often happens in new music, it got put on the shelf and it collected dust for the better part of 10 years. And then during COVID, we were brainstorming in our little Catholic Facebook group And we decided to start a virtual choir. And we said, well, we're all locked up at home anyways, and there's these singers, they can't even sing at Mass. Let's start a virtual choir. Let's sing the work of living Catholic composers and give people something beautiful to tune into as they're all weathering this insanity together. And I ended up being picked to do all the audio production for this, which we're just laughing with Joe how much fun editing can be sometimes. Every one of these projects, they're really edifying, and I learn a great deal, but they're also very painful to finish. It's not easy work because you have essentially people recording on some had beautiful setups at home studios. Others were recording on their iPhones. Yeah. You need to make them sound like they're together, listening to each other, breathing together, singing together in a cathedral. And I think we pulled it off. And as a reward, I think, for these efforts, I was allowed to submit one of my own pieces. And my wife said, do the Chesterton Carol. So I said, okay. So I rearranged it for choir and chamber orchestra. And that's the version that's floating around there right now. It's gotten some attention. And Maggie Gallagher with Benedict XVI Institute has done a beautiful job of promoting that. And now we've done several versions of it. We've done the parish version, which premieres this Saturday. Last night was the third performance of a version for a Baroque group. So 3 singers and Baroque instruments with a little bit of Baroque improvisation. And I haven't heard the recording yet. I was told it went very well. I wasn't able to attend that one. So it's taking on different lives. And I just said, whoever wants me to do something with it, if time's there, I'll do it.
If you want to do it for a female vocal trio, we'll do it.
Sure. We'll do that for next Advent. We'll talk after. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful piece, and maybe we can play it in here somehow, Joe. But just love the beginning with the oboes together. I think that gives that really English sound that you were kind of trying to go for, and it is sort of very melancholic and dark, but dark like a Rembrandt painting, not dark like, I don't know, a goth or something. It's beautiful. No, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I'm not familiar with maybe what our good friend Joseph has said about it, but I think I'm in your camp that the poem is first of all it's remarkably early for Chesterton, right? It's in his first publication, and the just the simplistic just stark image presentation, I think is really symbolic too of where Chesterton was at in his career, that he's transitioning from having been at art school, having been primarily oriented towards being a visual artist and being a painter. And this is a trend that continues throughout his entire writing career, right? He's obsessed with color and with he writes often in what I call a painterly way. And if you're not approaching Chesterton the way that you would maybe scan across a painting, it's very easy to lose the thread of Chesterton because of the fact that you're trying to look at it the way that maybe narrative reads, but that's not the way Chesterton's like sort of scanning a triptych sometimes when he's presenting images after image. So yeah, I think it's a remarkable piece in its simple beauty and to that darkness that you're saying, Grettelyn. This is uh, we're providing Advent reflections from Chesterton to our readers. You can sign up for that at chesterton.org/Advent, where we're kind of journeying through Advent with Chesterton and focusing on the figures of the Nativity.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a remarkable way of just really imagining that place, that time, but also imagining it kind of the way medieval morality plays imagine it, or even people think it's cheesy, but the Little Drummer Boy, which has that deliberate anachronism, built into it, where imagine if you were there bringing your talents. It's you know, I think Chesterton is kind of emblematic in a way as an artist of how we integrate with sort of the tradition. We bring our own experience and we bring novelty to it, but we also root ourselves in the mysteries. So I just want to commend the work. Personally, I find it very moving. So
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are kind of coming up on time here. Do you have any thoughts you want to share finally on Christmas, on Chesterton, on
Sure.
music?
It's funny. As these premieres were getting ready, and then you guys asked me about this podcast, a friend of mine on social media posted a Chesterton quote from Orthodoxy.
Mm.
And so I reached for my copy of Orthodoxy. And I don't know if anybody else does this, but whenever I'm reading a book, I should just keep a pencil with me or a highlighter, but I always earmark the page. So
Mm.
sometime in the next 30 years, I'll come back, open up this book, and go back to the parts I thought were most moving. And this
Mm.
quote hit me, and so I pulled out my earmarked copy. And sure enough, I had earmarked the page. And I'd like to read the quote because I think it relates to what we were speaking about here. And he had written, "The one created thing which we cannot look at is the one thing in the light of which we look at everything. Like the sun at noonday, mysticism explains everything else by the blaze of its own victorious invisibility.
Mm.
Detached intellectualism is, in the exact sense of a popular phrase, all moonshine, for it is light without heat, and it is secondary light reflected from a dead world. But the Greeks were right when they made Apollo the god both of imagination and of sanity, for he was both the patron of poetry and the patron of healing. Of necessary dogmas and a special creed I shall speak later, but that transcendentalism by which all men live has primarily much the position of the sun in the sky. We are conscious of it as a kind of splendid confusion. It is something both shining and shapeless, at once a blaze and a blur. But the circle of the moon is as clear and unmistakable, as recurrent and inevitable as the circle of Euclid on the blackboard. For the moon is utterly reasonable, and the moon is the mother of lunatics and has given to them all her name. And I thought two things hit me. Number one, I was thinking of the poem because the poem talks about Christ and the light and the halo, and there's so much light and color in that supposedly very simple text, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've also been reading a lot about the medieval writers lately on beauty, and they were very much obsessed with light and color. And I wonder if
Mm.
Chesterton was just not, working from a deeper knowledge of those writings into what Joe was saying, right, with that. But I think that says something about how to understand the poem in this case, and also how to approach beauty. That beauty is on that, is that light, is that reflecting light that we cannot at this point gaze at directly. But the arts, whether it be a poem or a composition or a small chapel beautifully made, can provide a way for us to shine a mirror against that light, so we can at least catch as much of it as we can bear. And I hope that as Catholic artists and those who support us, that we're able to do as much of that as possible.
That's beautiful. That resonates with me. Thank you. That's lovely. Gives you a feeling of that Marian element too, which is very strong in the poem. So, well, thank you so very much for joining us today, Mark. It's been really great.
That's my deep pleasure, and blessed Advent and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Thank you. You too. And as usual, thank you so much, Joe, for joining us today.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And we wish all of you listening a happy Advent. If you don't see us again, a Merry Christmas. And please do us a favor, give us a little Christmas present and like us, subscribe to us, so that every time we release a podcast, you can hear about it. We will put links to all the things that Mark mentioned in the description, so that you can check out his post and his music. And we'll post the poem too, so that you can read along. And again, thank you and happy Advent. And remember that Chesterton is always better with friends. See you next time.